Ladies and gentlemen, what is justice? What does justice mean to you? I'm sure everyone in this room has their own idea of what justice means to them. The Webster Dictionary defines justice as a manner or measure that strictly conforms to a fact or condition. Now the problem with this is, by whose measure are we talking about? And by what manner will this justice be applied? This is particularly important when it comes to our children, who depend on us to show them what justice really means. About a month ago, my youngest brother, who's a police sergeant down at the Roundhouse here in Philadelphia, told me a story about a guy that got arrested and was put in a holding cell, who was a repeat child offender. Because of overcrowding, he was put into general population, and one of the other inmates found out about his background and his record, and subsequently beat him to death. Now, about 6 months later, during the man's allocution, the judge asked him why he would do such a thing and throw his life away. The man simply replied, "Because he'll do it again." Now, is this justice? To this man it was. Crimes against children, even in prison, are considered heinous and are not tolerated. So what do we do about this? What can we do to stop pedophiles from hurting our children? Certainly not what this man did, but statistics do show that child molesters will offend again if they get out. And this is not nearly good enough to show our children justice. Today I must ask each and every one of you to look deep inside yourself and to stand with me in bringing justice to our children. And not the kind of justice that man believed in, but a preventive and protective justice that will show our children what justice really means. So how do we do this? I propose lifelong parole for repeat offenders, with constant tracking of their moves, and this will be explained later in my speech. And secondly, and probably more importantly, chemical maintenance. There's some new cutting-edge research that's shown promise in decreasing the urges that these offenders feel. Now, I don't claim to be an expert in pedophilia, nor do I claim to be savvy in the political arena when it comes to legislation. But what I do know is this, that I'm a loving, caring father who's concerned in protecting my children as well as yours. And I've done extensive research on this subject to ensure that I can bring you the facts so you too can know what we're dealing with and what our best options are in pertaining to justice for our children's sake. Today I will show you these facts, and I ask you to stand together in stopping child predators from roaming our streets freely. First, we have to know what pedophilia is. According to Dr. Charles Bertrand, board-certified psychiatrist and medical director at State Hospital in Louisville, Kentucky, he characterizes pedophilia as a recurrent, intense, sexual arousing fantasies, urges, and behaviors that involve sexual activity with prepubescent children. Dr. Bertrand suggests that child molesters should never be considered normal and are in fact suffering from a disease. Now, this was disturbing to me when I first heard this, because it was really easy for me to put child predators into a category where they were just a societal menace, that they were just evil and you can just lock them away and forget about them. But what if it's a disease? What if it affects people like alcoholism or gambling addiction? What if it's something like that? That's a whole other thing that we have to look at when it comes to this. Dr. Bertrand also asserts that 70% of these crimes are committed by people that the kids know. Parents, grandparents, priests, ministers, uncles, males that they trust, and usually start the vicious cycle over again. He also contends that most pedophiles are multiple offenders, which is consistent with all of the statistical evidence. Now, according to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, there are currently 500,000 registered sex offenders in the United States alone. Most of these sex offenders are not in prison. That is to say that they serve limited sentences and then they get out again to reoffend. Another point is that the community supervision is essential, but it is so overwhelmed they can't keep track of all of them. Now, one could argue that there are laws that protect our children and that we needn't worry. This is true to some extent, but not nearly good enough. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, And despite new legislation for child predators, not all states recognize these new laws. That's to say that if somebody does a crime here in Pennsylvania, they can slip over to Indiana and do the crime again without a national database to catch them and to give them a more viable sentence. This is a problem. Now, right now, there's legislation getting pushed in that says within 3 years there will be a national mandate for all child predators, and that if you offend here, you're going to go to another state, they'll be recognized. But that's 3 years away. Despite this new legislation, not all states recognize the child predators, and they slip through the cracks. So what do we do? What can we do? One idea is being investigated in Oklahoma as we speak. Senator Jay Gum is pushing for legislation that could give repeat child molesters the death penalty. Now, although I understand the senator's frustration, I believe this solution is problematic, and here's why. One, is this any different from the story I told you in the beginning of the speech about the man who killed the person in the holding cell? Secondly, and more importantly, when you talk about the death penalty, we talk about a whole lot of issues that have to be dealt with. First, the cost. The litigation alone for years it could cost up to millions of dollars, and that's a problem. Secondly, there's more of a burden on an already overburdened system. But more important than any of these reasons is that it does not deter crime. All statistics show that the death penalty does not deter crime, especially if the problem is psychological and not a product of just plain evil. Ladies and gentlemen, from my research, there are two major problems that we must face here today. One, all evidence suggests that they will offend again, and locking them up for life is not an option in most cases. Secondly, and more importantly, punishment by taking a life brings about various problems of ethics and economical issues that would only serve in making the problem greater. So let's look at the solution. What I propose is a remedy that's both cost-effective and ethically sound. First, ankle bracelets when they're on probation. That means when they go out, they're monitored. They have to be back in at a certain time or they violate their probation. On the other side of this issue is that they can take them off. So that's only a short-term solution. Secondly, for any repeat offender, a lifelong GPS tracking system. GPS tracking system makes good sense only if a portion of the offender's wages is garnished to pay for it, along with a victim's fund. So if we take 20% of the money that they make, put 10% into paying for their supervision, and the other 10% to pay for the victims that they've hurt. This is a small price considering the damage they've done. But the most interesting and controversial solution to this problem is chemical maintenance. Dr. Charles Wagemaker, an associate professor at New York Medical College, has lobbied to require convicted offenders to receive periodic injections to inhibit sex drive. The drug is called tryptolin, and it acts through the pituitary gland, and it lowers the testosterone level in people. It has been called a chemical castration by its dejectors because it's an invasive procedure. You have to put a needle in someone's body. What I say to this is that drastic crimes like this require drastic measures. But here's the thing. Out of all previous ideas regarding solutions, this has the most promise. There was a study done by Dr. Wagemaker where 24 of these inmates were monitored for a year, and the results were striking. Out of all the inmates, there was a 0 recidivism rate. That means for the whole year, no one repeat offended. And they all lived in their usual environments, and they did their daily things that they usually did, and the urges decreased significantly. And that's not only being reported by the offenders themselves, but it was noticed by the family members and the probation officers. Obviously, more tests are needed to determine the drug's validity, but all early indications say that this treatment may significantly decrease sex crimes against children. Ladies and gentlemen, I must ask you once again to look closely at these facts. There are child predators out there, and these are terrible, terrible crimes against both God and man. Statistics tell us that 9 out of 10 of these people will offend again unless something is done. I ask you to stand with me today and to write to our state representatives to change these laws for the better of all our children. 1, by constant supervision through the means which we discussed earlier, and 2, by chemical maintenance regimen, which inhibits sexual urges and increases the chances for these offenders to strike again. There is power in numbers. And if we stand together, we can make a change and show our children what justice really means. Let's give these kids a chance, and they'll thank you, and so will I.